that's for me, living life so merrily. It's so easy, can't you see? Polka, polka, that's for me. Polka, polka, everyone come along, it's lots of fun.
Welcome back to the Talk and Shoot podcast. I'm Miguel Dorati. I got my sidekick, Mike Davis, with me. Mike, how you doing?
Real good, Miguel. We're doing a state of MMA today. I'm kind of excited. There's a lot of activity. Recent UFC in Chicago. So there's lots to talk about.
Absolutely. We are doing the state of MMA right now. We're going to recap last weekend's UFC, touch on it a little bit. You had TJ Dillashaw facing Renan Barão in the rematch in the main event out of Chicago. And obviously we're going to head over to UFC 190, which is coming up this weekend here on Saturday. And what you got there is you got the headliner of Ronda Rousey and Bethe Correia. So, Mike, you had the UFC in Chicago. We had the main event. Let's get into TJ Dillashaw and Renan Barão here first. What'd you think of the fight?
Well, going into the fight, you got Renan Barão that went 9 years without a loss since they ran into TJ Dillashaw. Was a major upset. As the odds makers, none of them even had him even close to winning that fight, which he pulled off. Initially, I had thought it was possibly Renan Barão's worst fight as compared to TJ Dillashaw's best fight. They just kind of met on that day. But the dominance that TJ Dillashaw showed was just scary. Like, it showed me that, that guy is 110% the real deal. I know he had issues at the end of the first round where he got stunned and had that fight. If that round had gone longer, there could have been a different outcome. But, in the 4 rounds that they had fought, that was the only time that guy was ever in trouble. I was very impressed with his performance.
I agree. I think, to give him even further props, in the podcast last week when we were looking at the fight, pre-fight, I gave Barão a little bit of a chance. He was a 2-1 underdog. And just taking into account the fact that he hadn't lost in so long, and what you said, the factor of maybe we just saw the best TJ Dillashaw a little while ago, and if he comes back down to earth a little bit, Barão will catch him. Dillashaw doesn't have a lot of fights. He had only defended the belt once in more than a year. That one win over Joe Soto.
Joe Soto, last-minute replacement.
Yeah, it's an admirable fight. It's admirable for both of them to have taken it, but it brings up questions, You were facing a guy who's probably not a title contender, and you let it go long with the whole psychological baggage and stuff. So it's hard to get a measure for that. And so how much credit do you give TJ Dillashaw? Well, he just went out and basically took that credit that people were withholding with this destruction of Renan Barão. He beat him up, as you pointed out, from pillar to post, and it was an impressive performance.
No, it really was.
Now, the co-main event I'm interested in, because the co-main event now ties into also UFC 190, which we'll get into here, which is coming up this weekend here. But the co-main event saw Miesha Tate taking on Jessica Ai. And what'd you think of Tate?
I thought Tate just looked absolutely dominant. She had a kind of a rough first round where they were feeling each other out, and Jessica Ai was landing really hard. The first 2 rounds, there were spurts of brilliance out of Jessica Ai, but Tate was just too much. She was relentless. Her highs are really high, but then her lows, it's like you try to keep your low right around the mid-level mark, but her lows really dipped. And when she's catching her breath, trying to all right, let me just find a different angle. It wasn't as it looked like she's still improving as a fighter, but when she has flashes of brilliance, you can tell it's just absolutely the next level. I was impressed with Tate, but I did give her some issues.
Yeah, I
can agree with that.
Ai's very good. Tate is very, very good. Tate's got the baggage of, in front of everybody, she's just lost to Rousey twice. Here's an interesting fact. She got Rousey into the 3rd round, and when you combine the fact that in their first fight, I think they went something deep into the 1st round, and it wasn't, a wipeout.
Rousey's been quoted as saying that she carried her, just to hurt her.
It could. There was that talk. They didn't like each other a lot, and they were on the TV show and stuff. But the fact of it is Ronda Rousey's been in the ring longer with Miesha Tate, or in the octagon rather, longer with Miesha Tate than she has with all of her other opponents combined. If my math is correct.
No, you're right. You're right on that.
So, I mean, she's one of the top girls. We could say that. There are other girls around that have beaten Misha that are in the UFC. You know, one being Kat Zingano, who also got run over by Rousey, and another Rousey victim, I believe, is Sarah Kaufman. So you've got a situation there where I think there is a level below Rousey, where there's just a big jump to Rousey being so dominant, and then there's a handful of girls you could toss in there, and Misha may be a notch above that pool of girls, even though some have beaten her and stuff. So now Misha's won 4 in a row, and she's probably going to get another shot at Rousey. Rousey talked about fighting her again. Rousey said Correia, Tate, film a movie, and then who's next, or something like that was the quote that was coming out of the Rousey camp.
Let the crop grow, and then she's there to harvest it. Yeah, something of that nature. Sure.
Yeah, so I don't know if I'm excited about seeing Tate and Rousey 3, but you got to give Tate props. She's come back to win 4 in a row, and she's come back, still hungry and looking for the belt and stuff. I think she really wants to fight.
It's got to be in the back of your head, though. You've got. I think Rousey armbarred her twice. I think she just refused to tap in the second fight. I think she refused to tap on the first one. And then on the second one, Rousey was saying, "No, I'm going to armbar you." She's like, "You're not going to armbar me." And Rousey called her submission, which is, insane. I mean, anyone else to pull it off, it would be like a huge news story. Kind of like
the Babe Ruth thing.
Yeah, pointing out his home run. That is seriously impressive. But because it's Rousey, it doesn't get the recognition I believe it deserves.
Now, let's get through some of the card, because the undercard, I think, had a lot of exciting stuff. You had a lot of veterans. For example, I was impressed with Ben Saunders. I like watching Ben fight.
That guy's a beast, man. That guy's a beast. I know he's got a susceptible chin, but Kenny Robertson really tested him, and Saunders, with his length and size, it tells me that he might make a credible run towards a title shot, if he continues on this path.
And he's big. He's big for that weight.
Huge.
I actually was the matchmaker for the first 4 fights of this kid's career. And he fought...
Was he with Eddie Bravo at that time, or was he with a different camp, do you recall?
He was out of Florida. He was out of Florida. We used him in Florida, and I want to say American Top Team in its nascent stages. He may have come from the Freestyle Fighting Academy. There were a couple of camps down there, and that I don't recall who would be in his corner. I can look it up and stuff, and I can tell you from there. But I was the matchmaker for the first 4 fights. He fought bigger, obviously, up to including in 205. So at 170, he may be the biggest guy in the weight class. He is talented. I think he's been up and down a little bit. He's had a couple of runs with the UFC. He's got a couple of, the Bellator run and stuff. And he's never quite broken through yet. And I'd like to see him put together a good, solid 2-3 year run here, because he's on a nice little run here with this return to the UFC. He won a couple. Also coming back is another veteran that people love is Tom Lawler.
He got his win, huh?
Yeah, Tom got in there, and he beat Gian Vellante.
Like Apollo Creed. I always am a fan of his entrances. Unfortunately, it didn't make the TV telecast, but his entrances are fantastic.
Yeah, he's a guy that gets, I think, putting on a show means. What'd you think of Joe Lauzon and Gomi? I thought that fight was disappointing.
I kind of knew that coming in. I know Joe was a huge favorite walking in. That was kind of a gift fight. Gomi, I don't know. I don't know what they're doing with him. They keep putting him in like with Guida, with Lauzon. They put him in with these grapplers where that's where his issue is. Like he hates getting choked, and he just has issues with grapplers. Like if you throw him in there with somebody that just does stand up, I think it'd be a fantastic fight.
Yeah, I mean, I think Gomi's a Japanese fighter from 10 years ago, really, and
he's shot.
He's here on his name. His style hasn't really changed much. He hasn't adapted to the new style. So a lot of the younger guys and guys with more aggression on the ground and stuff are able to catch him. He's a little bit more interested in putting on maybe a show and stuff. Who else was interesting? Eddie Wineland caught a loss, but I thought Brian Caraway looked very good. I know both those guys, too.
Wineland seems to me that he looks for ways to lose. Like, he had Brad Pickett finish in the first round. He carried him for the rest of the fight. I've noticed that with Wineland in the past, and it upsets me because I think that guy is a lot better fighter than what he shows in there. And, he's towards the end of his career as well. And, to drop a fight against Brian Caraway is insane, especially when you're Eddie Wineland. The guy, I think he also had the Uriah Faber fight won and just kind of allowed rounds to slip away from him. It's crazy.
Yeah, I'm a fan of both guys. I mean, I think they're just heading in different directions. I think Caraway, I remember Caraway, he was a baby, but he was hanging around with the American Top Team and stuff down in the Florida team as well. And now,
he's really well liked.
Yeah, so he's always been around when he was a young guy. Been around the fights, and so he's got a lot of experience. He's got a lot of fight experience now too. So he's been, I'm talking about times before he actually made his pro debut. He worked the corner for guys in Florida and stuff like that. He's been around for a long time. Always had a great head about the game and was really bright. He's won 3 of 4 in the UFC. The fella he lost to, Rafael Asuncion, I think is tough. And I don't know if he's ever going to break through to that level. But I think he's heading up. While Wineland, I hate to say he's done, but
he's done.
It's getting to the point where you don't want to see a guy go in there with that style, and he's not as sharp as he once was anymore, because then it becomes about punishment. And Eddie will stand in there with anybody and put on a show and put on a fight, but it's about kind of health and long term stuff at this point with him. He's dropped 3 out of 4. And been stopped on a lot of them, So, anyway, let's head over to UFC 190. We're in Brazil here, and you got Rousey and Correia as the main event. Now, what are your thoughts on this main event here? Rousey, the over-under is 1.5, and I think the over is paying,
like 16 to 1 or something.
Yeah, something
They're
crazy.
Saying it's breaking records in regards to
I mean, so the question is does Correia have enough to get out of the first round? Does she get out of the first minute?
Well, yeah, she's definitely going to get out of the first minute. You know what? She might even get out of the first round. I mean, Rousey's already telling everyone that she's going to carry her, and she's going to punish her. I know Correia made a suicide comment towards Rousey in regards to, what she should do to herself after she loses this fight. And, Rousey responded with, my dad is going to be there with me. It was like a real direct, short, emotional response from Rousey that it just kind of told you, like Rousey's going to go in there with some fire. Like, she is going to hurt this girl.
Yeah, I think, Correia's one of the... She's a Brazilian, so, I hate the stereotype and stuff like that, but you get the Latin hot blood or however you want to... And so she's an emotional fighter. And, I mean, the bottom line is this well, there's a lot of aspects to it, actually. But she's undefeated 9-0, and she's confident in her game, and you want to see that. I actually think she thinks she can win. And I'd rather have a fighter go into the fight, at least with that mindset, as opposed to, having already, mentally defeated themselves before the fight. I think she did make a couple of comments that the press and everybody manipulated into being, over the line somehow and stuff like that. I don't think she meant to take it that far over the line, but Rousey did have something personal that came up, and I don't remember the details and stuff.
Yeah, but, I don't think that was her intention, though. I think you're right on that. It was just, it's something people do say.
People say stupid shit all the time, and Bethe Correia, I mean, she's not a rocket scientist, you know what I mean? She's a professional
language barrier.
Exactly, she's a professional fighter. And so I don't blame her for that, but this is what I think. I think I've seen Rousey in interviews also recently, and she's been talking about, taking the emotion out of it and doing the job, going out there and finishing the fights and doing looking at it from that aspect and not letting emotion play into it. So we'll see if she decides to beat up Bethe and extend her, or she comes out, gets given an armbar, if she wants to shave some seconds off her 14-second performance last time and get her in 10 seconds or something. So I'm not sure, but I'd like to see Correia extend it. But this is what I think. Rousey's, I think, a minus 1,500 favorite. And what you got?
That's insane.
And what you got with Rousey is this is where I think her judo background really helps in certain terms, because you do get to compete in hostile territory, whether it's a different city in the States or whether it's a different country and something more international and stuff like that. You do face having to travel and having to do that. And I think, Rousey's experience is such that, the travel to Brazil gets a lot of people. Most of the Brazilian guys in headliners and in fights in Brazil against Americans have won.
Well, anyone going to Japan from the United States.
Absolutely. I mean, they are rough trips.
And vice versa.
And Brazil doesn't have the time difference, but it's got language barriers and, all kinds of things that people suffer from in those trips. But I think Rousey, she's a champion. She's going to have a little bit more resources. If she needs a translator, she'll get a translator. It doesn't, and I think she's going down there really focused and really strong on the mindset. On the opposite side, the Brazilians usually, they're fighting at home. They feed off the crowd and stuff like that. And Correia, may benefit from that. But now we're talking about a situation where Correia's got 9 career fights. And I just don't think that she ever imagined that for her 10th career fight, she would be headlining a UFC pay-per-view. Think about what that means.
That's a huge weight to carry.
So she's the main event of the big show, and she's facing the dominant champion and stuff. And I'm talking about, somebody that once you get in the ring, or the octagon, rather, I keep saying ring, but the octagon, those adrenaline dumps and things like that, and it's like, is she going to be ready for that?
No.
So, that erases just about the only advantage that the kid could have, which is the home field kind of thing,
When that adrenaline dump is weird, like you see Whiteman had it twice against Silva, and he was able to push through it, but you recognize, he just had an adrenaline dump, this fight might be over. And, dude, when those adrenaline dumps take place, man, it is nothing pretty.
And I mean, the fact is Correia's won her 3 UFC fights. She's 3-0. Julie Kedzie is her first fight win.
I'll even say Chad Mendes had one against Conor McGregor.
Could be, yeah. I mean maybe
he's huffing and puffing out of his mouth.
Maybe he just got tired. But let me go through Beth, because she fought Julie Kedzie. Kedzie, a real solid veteran, a real solid pro, but she was towards the end of her career. Then she fought Jessamine Duke.
That Julie Kedzie fight.
Really not a proven commodity in MMA, Jessamine Duke. And then she fought Shayna Baszler, who really, honestly, Shayna had seen better days as well. She has not looked good, in her UFC run, unfortunately. And she was a fighter that was, at the forefront of doing women's MMA a few years back. But I think Correia, Correia's 32 also, but Correia, I think she got a couple of girls that were towards the end of their career, and nothing on her resume prepares her to main event the UFC against Ronda Rousey. So I think you're looking at a first-round finish here again. And this card in the UFC...
Rousey's going to carry her. I'm telling you. She's already doing interviews saying that she is just going to punish her.
Let's see how that goes. I mean, there comes a point where if there's an arm bar there and you're not taking it, I don't know what... I don't even think I want to see that, But anyway, let's go through the rest of the card. I want to focus on the opener of the pay-per-view, which is another women's bout, and this is in the strawweight division. And what you have is Jessica Aguilar coming in, making her UFC debut, taking on Claudia Gadelha, and in the at the sport books, Gadelha is the favorite. The thing about Gadelha is that she's already got the UFC experience. She's 1-1 in the UFC. What you got to give Gadelha credit for is that Gadelha went the distance and actually won on one of the judges' cards against Joanna Jedrzejczyk, the female strawweight world champion. So she extended her, actually. This was back in December of 2014. But Gadella comes in as the favorite against Aguilar. Aguilar is 19-4 over the course of her career and was generally acknowledged to be the best 115-pounder in the world until a couple of years back when the UFC kind of swept in, not even a couple of years back, but the UFC last year and it started concentrating on the strawweight division and swept up a lot of talent.
I'm waiting for the heavyweight division for females in the UFC.
Here's the thing: is
that'll never happen.
And I don't know that that's the right way to go, because the thing is all kidding aside, we could be men and joke, women shouldn't be fighting or whatever. And Dana's made comments like that before, that until he met Rousey, he was never even going to try it. But he recognized the fighter in Rousey, and everybody's got their corny story. The bottom line is this: is this a sport? Because if it's a sport and there are competitors, then there should be a playing field for them. You know what I mean? It just is as simple as that. So, heavyweights, they're going to be fat or whatever. It's like, look, listen, there's competition worldwide in heavyweight women's boxing. Some of the other weight classes up until, 160, 170 pounds have incredible athletes in the boxing world. Holly Holm has come over as a former world champion with almost 40 boxing fights and is crossing over to the UFC. And she hasn't really looked like a world beater. She's fighting it tough. But
I thought she looked good on that last fight.
Yeah, she did. But it's not, I wouldn't rush her into a fight with Rousey based on any of that. But the point is there is competition level. So now I just chafe at the state of the women because of the way the UFC has decided to run this. Any woman who is about 125 pounds can maybe make the 115 pounds, but they have to kill themselves. And now in the UFC, they can't compete in the weight class that benefits them. They have to kill themselves and go down. If they go up, they're going to be facing highly skilled, bigger women, and that's always a problem as well. So you've got 125 completely in limbo, and there's a lot of talent out there at 125. The argument could be made, Kat Zingano could be at 125. One of the top girls in the weight class now, but she came up from there. There are many others. At 145, you would clearly have Cyborg Santos, and the UFC just refuses to do this. They want to insist on Cyborg Santos dropping down to 135 pounds. And, some people say it's done, this, that, and the other. Until there's a poster out with the UFC's press monster advertising that fight, I'm going to hold off on feeling confident that it's going to happen, because I haven't seen that.
You know what, though? If she was smart, and I believe the people around her are...
Who?
Rousey.
Okay.
She could absolutely make that exactly like the Mayweather-Pacquiao fight. She needs to wait on that as long as possible. I agree with you that it could be made into a very big fight, and it doesn't. You can wait on it, but I think you've already Pacquiao Mayweathered it and let it extend itself a little too long. The fight probably should have already happened. Here's the way it goes in my book. When the UFC goes in to do MMA, women's MMA, they should have activated at least the 4 core weight classes, if not the 5 that are active in Invicta. That way, the athletes feel that they can participate in a sport and they're not having to compromise something like size or kill themselves cutting weight and stuff. So what you would have had naturally and organically happen is you would probably have Cyborg with the 145-pound women's championship. You'd have Rousey running everyone over still. You'd have some competition at 125 with somebody very good, Kat Zingano, to toss the name out there. And at 115, you've got what happened with Joanna Jędrzejczyk and stuff. Michelle Waterson and some other people could compete at 105 atom weight, even though they look good. Raquel Panay and a couple people, even though they look good at 115, that doesn't seem to be an issue. But there's competition all over the place. Rousey continues to run people over. Perhaps Cyborg doesn't fight as much at 145 as you develop to think. But what happens normally is you have Rousey
go up a weight class and challenge to become a two-weight division champion, which is a very new level of prestige, but it is a very prestigious move because there's very few UFC fighters that have done it at all, and she would be the first woman to do that. And instead, she's insisting on a bigger girl come down to her weight, like she doesn't chase anybody or anything like that, only because the weight class doesn't exist, only because of an ego problem with the UFC and their insistence on doing things completely their way. If this was a sport, all the weight classes need to be activated. That's all there is to it.
Well, Big L, you and I obviously are boxing aficionados, and we've done numerous podcasts about, defining what it means to be a great fighter. And as dominant as Rousey is, there's an accolade, based on, her actions that she'll never be able to accomplish, which you and I can agree that you need to have this in order to be universally accepted as, the greatest fighter ever. And that is having a belt in more than one weight class. And no one's ever done it in the UFC up until this time.
There have been a couple in the UFC. Vitor Belfort, Couture, I think BJ Penn held 2 belts.
BJ Penn, you know what? Okay.
So,
Mike, this is where I rewind, and I go like this. You cut me off, Miguel. Women. See how we just recovered right there?
That's all good. It's all good. But no, I understand what you mean. It's a rare accolade. MMA.
It's like, guys like in boxing, when they talk about like the greatest fighters, it's like, wow, he's part of a rare alumni of having more than one belt in different weight classes, or more than a belt in more than one weight class. I
agree. The history of MMA is shorter, and it is different. Like we mentioned, there are a couple of examples of guys that did make that. I don't think there's any doubt that right now Rousey's the greatest female fighter we've ever seen, especially in MMA, obviously.
The UFC has sent people. They've had to have sent people at anyone that beat her in judo, trying to entice them into the sport of mixed martial arts. You know that those conversations have taken place.
Yeah, you hope there's some interesting stuff going on because it is hard to match up. I'll tell you that. So we don't give Correia much of a chance, but let's get back to UFC 190. We digress there. You got Jessica Aguilar meeting Claudia Gadelha. Aguilar is coming in as an underdog. She has a wide resume. She's won like her last 10 fights in a row and stuff. Most of it is she's got a pair of wins over Megumi Fuji, who's older but is considered one of the wizards of Japanese women's MMA for a long time. She's beat a couple of girls that are in the UFC now. Talking about Lisa Ellis, she beat Carla Esparza. And the bottom line is Jessica Aguilar is ready for the UFC. She was with the WSOF, I believe, and the WSOF went ahead and released her because they really have no one for her to fight. And now she's making her debut. Yes, Gadelha is a tough fight, fighting her in Brazil, but I think Aguilar, we're going to find out about Aguilar right now. I think that's a really interesting fight to open the pay-per-view. The rest of the UFC 190 card is interesting because it's a lot like the Chicago card with a lot of veterans, a lot of guys, with a lot of fights and looking to jockey for position and, either make one more run or at least stay with the company and, get the paydays and that sort of stuff. So let's go through this real fast. You also got to tie into the UFC's Ultimate Fighter Brazil show because you got Mauricio Rua facing Antonio Rogerio Nogueira. It's a rematch from Pride, but that's the co-main event. And, an all-Brazilian co-main event. I like it. I like it for what it is. Nogueira was the replacement for Anderson Silva. Remember, when Silva was suspended and stuff like that, there was the announcement that he was going to be part of the reality show. Well, they aced that, and he didn't appear on the reality show. They went ahead and put the Nogueira brothers in as trainers. They keep their format, coach versus coach. They've done the fight before. They're both high-level guys. They're both, burnt out a little bit at the end of their careers maybe. But it's still a good fight for the Brazilian fans and worth watching.
I agree.
Getting into the heavyweights, I think Rodrigo Big Nog is on the card too, and he's facing Stefan Struve, and I think that's a really interesting fight. I think Struve's a big favorite in this one, and I don't know if that's the case because Nogueira is burnt out, and he's old and slow as hell, but he's still Nogueira in terms of if he wants to be efficient, protect himself. If he can get to a position with Struve, he will take him out. Struve has a weak chin. Nogueira can hit. And on the ground, I think Nogueira can be very efficient when he wants to be.
I mean, is it me, or do you think Struve is kind of like the Primo Carnera of MMA?
Man, there are times where I've been very high on Stefan Struve because, with his height, he is absolutely one of the unique...
He's very difficult to match up with,
yeah. Yeah, how do you train for somebody who's 7 feet tall that moves like him and knows how to fight, You can get people big that are big and stuff, but, I mean, he's very hard to prepare for. People found his weakness early. He's never going to grow a chin, So, I mean, he's going to be...
He also, I think he had some heart issues with his heart as well, so he I mean, I'd try to test his cardio as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, This
is a guy that a few years ago they said would never fight again.
And he's just 27 years old now, and he has over 30 fights. So that's the thing is if somehow some of those other issues were to be solved, you might have Stefan Struve hanging around for another 10 years and watching this guy fight.
Crazy.
And Nogueira doesn't have 10 months left in him, I don't think. But
this might be it.
but we got Nogueira. I think Nogueira's in a situation where at home he's comfortable. He knows what he's got to do. I mean, he's a professional through and through. I think Struve could be in for a rude awakening in there. Another interesting heavyweight fight on the card sees Antonio Silva, Bigfoot, facing Saul Palelli. Palelli out of Australia, and he's got a couple of getting into Antonio Silva. Silva's lost like a couple in a row. He hasn't won in a long time in something like 4 or 5 fights, and he really does need a win. Palelli's coming off a win. He's at the point where he's 4-1 in the UFC, but he's faced very weak competition. I mean, probably the best fighter he's faced is Pat Barry. And, I was never a Pat Barry fan.
No.
He lost to Jared Rosholt, so I think you got to give Rosholt some credit. But Palelli, I think, is slow and big. I mean, it's a matchup of two guys that are very similar, actually. I give Silva a little more credit for being more aggressive, and that might be the edge in this fight.
I agree. And, UFC 200 is right around the corner.
Yeah, it is coming up. It'll be interesting to see exactly where it lands and what type of fight they're going to look to put on there. Could that be the return of John Jones?
You took the words right out of my mouth.
So we'll see. We'll see what John's capable of doing by them. But anyway, let me get into a little bit of the undercard. I find an interesting fight being Damian Maia and Neil Magny at welterweight.
This is a huge step up for Neil Magny, and he's a cardio machine. Like his first, I don't think he's won a first round in many of his fights, including he fought for me locally and he lost the first round. Magny continues to improve and get better. He's still got a ceiling. He's mentally tough. Magny's going to be one of those sleeper guys to where all of a sudden, like he's competing with some of the best talent and hanging with them, and it's just like, where did this guy come from?
Well, this is going to be a good place for him to find out. He's now popped off 7 UFC wins in a row, but as you said,
they've really brought him along, though.
They have, because the competition level that he's faced is not the Damian Maia level. And you look at who they fought over the course of their careers and stuff. Magny's been being brought along. He lost a couple of quick fights early in his career in the UFC, and after that, it seems that they put him in with competition where, obviously he did okay. When you're talking about Damian Maia, you're talking about a guy, who went through a unanimous decision with Chris Weidman.
That's insane.
He had a 5-round split fight with Jake Shields. He went to a decision with Rory McDonald.
That's you know what though, if I were to point a weakness out with Damian, it's in the later rounds he has issues.
Yeah, I think 170 is an extreme weight cut for him. I've known him for a long time. He competed at 185 comfortably. He comes from obviously from jiu-jitsu. And I first became aware of him with the Abu Dhabi Combat Club's World Submission Fighting Championships, where he won a world championship one year. And I think one of his things is that he's very incredibly good on the ground, obviously, but he's not aggressive sometimes. And I think it behooves Magny to stay away from ground fighting with him, but I think his weakness is still the stand-up and actually some of the physicality. I think at 170 it's a big suck, a big weight cut, and I think he could get, Rory McDonald out-athleted him and he looked tired and old. And I think Magny might not be quite on the athletic level as McDonald, but Magny's a superior athlete in this fight.
I am really excited for that fight. This could be Neil Magny's coming out party.
I think that this one has that possibility too.
Is there any odds on that yet? Have you seen any?
They're out there. I can look them up while we're talking here.
Okay.
Getting back into the veteran theme, you got Yuri Alcantara, another guy with nearly 40 fights, and he's on the card facing off against a fellow countryman, Leandro Issa. So we'll see. I think they'd like to see Alcantara. It's a big step up for Issa. Alcantara's been around a long time. Alcantara is coming off a loss, but he's a recent loss, and he's trying to bounce back and get his name back up there. So I think through and through, this card is worth it. Most of it is on the pay-per-view. Obviously, you get to see the preliminary fights are on the UFC's Fight Pass, and they also are going to be airing pieces of that card on the Fox Sports Network. So you can go ahead and catch the Neil Magny, Damian Maia will be on Fox Sports, for example.
That's awesome.
Right now, Maia, if you free TV, and it may be the fight of the night. Damian Maia is a favorite at minus 165 with Magny paying back plus 145.
Okay, wait. What's Maia's plus 145?
No, Maia's minus 165.
Okay, so he's a favorite. Okay.
Yeah, Magny's the dog at plus 145. Yep. So
I think that might have a good value on it, for people that are gambling.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of fights on this card that you want to look at. I think the Big Nog one with Stefan Struve is one that you definitely want to look at. Struve is a minus 170 favorite. Fighting in Brazil, I know Nog has slowed down an incredible amount, and if he gets any slower, he's going to lose. But at plus 150, I think you're talking about one of the legendary professionals of all time, and he's fighting a guy with weaknesses that are obvious. So, I don't know. I think that one's a possibility. I think Saul Pelele at minus 200 with Antonio Silva underdog at plus 170. I think you might put together a little $10 parlay there and pick all the underdogs on that one and see how much it comes up.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Interesting
You
card.
certainly, can spend $10 in a worse way.
Yeah, and just to go through the last two fights now, this isn't going to be big in the United States and stuff, but the guys deserve credit because they've been through. This is the finals of the UFC's Tough Brazil reality show 4, and you've got these guys are on the main card, the pay-per-view, and they deserve the credit because they've been fighting on the TV show. I think they taped in Vegas, actually, but it's been a Brazil show, and they're working in the lightweights and the bantamweight divisions. In the lightweights, you got Glyco Franca, favorite at minus 170, facing Fernando Bruno. And at the bantamweights finals, you got Reginaldo Vieira, a big underdog at plus 260 to Deleno Lopez, minus 320. So those are basically a wrap-up of the UFC's 190 card here. Haven't heard anything in terms of this week, in terms of any major activity in terms with suspensions, drug testing, or any controversies like that. We got into a little bit of the Stitch Duran controversy last week. But, the UFC's a machine. That's going to blow over. And, Stitch Duran is going to be back working boxing for $40 a weekend, Well,
that's his choice. That's where, that's what he wanted.
Yep. So it's interesting. Let's see what these guys look like. Let's take a look at the uniforms. They're fighting in Brazil. Is there going to be any difference? I saw where... Reebok actually, this was news this week. Reebok actually came out, and when they were talking about the Stitch Duran and the firing and this, that, and the other stuff, they actually came out and said, look, this is not on us. We're not forcing the cornerman or anybody to wear anything, or they kind of washed their hands of it and blamed the UFC on it. So there's still some rocky points, or actually they said that they're not responsible for the way the money gets divided up and things like that. So I'm saying kind of the UFC maybe opted to give it all to the fighters and didn't take a piece for everybody, that was getting it previous or whatever. They were washing their hands of it, but let's see if the uniforms look any different from the last UFC. It's a pay-per-view. It's a fight on foreign territory. Will there be a little bit more of a flag and a national type of identity to the show? I'm interested to see that.
I agree. I as well.
All right, we're running here about 45 minutes, and I think we can agree that the UFC is still on an upswing. They're coming.
It really is. It's hot again. The UFC's hot again.
They're coming off of a Fox show with Dillashaw and Barao that was a home run. On free TV, you got a championship fight. I expect to see Dillashaw, especially if you get Dillashaw-Faber, you will certainly be getting that on pay-per-view. Dillashaw, likewise with Dillashaw, Dominic Cruz, it doesn't really matter. He's heading to pay-per-view next. And you got a chance to see him free TV. And next weekend, arguably the UFC's second biggest star behind Conor McGregor, you got Ronda Rousey headlining in Brazil.
Wow.
So, all right, Mike, let's check in a little bit next week. We'll see how these fights go, and we'll keep running down the UFC calendar. We do have Bellator coming up. Very little news out of the Bellator front, obviously in the build-up to their shows, but we can do some Bellator talk in the next podcast as well.
Sounds great. Excellent. All right, Miguel, always a pleasure, sir.
Thank you, man. Talk to you later.
Yep.
This is Mike Davis and Miguel Arati signing off for the Talk and Shoot podcast, and we've been talking shoot about the UFC. Thanks.